Okay, good morning, everyone. I have this wonderful lapel mic, which I'm told I need to sort of hold to my mouth, so please excuse me as I get used to using this. My name is Craig Connolly. I'm CEO of the Ian Potter Foundation. I'd like to welcome you all here this morning and thank you for coming. I've just been sent an email actually by Alberto Falan. I'll introduce the team on my right in a moment, but given that we're here at the Menzies School, we've just asked the question of one of our admin staff back in Melbourne, what's our association been with the Menzies? And in 2010, the Potter Foundation awarded a 3-year, $1.5 million grant for the establishment of the Centre for Child Health and Education in Darwin, based at the Menzies School for Health Research. And as I understand it, assisted in establishing that centre to the point where it's now sustainable and generating both ARC and NHMRC funding as well. So I think it's great that we are here at an institute that we've supported historically. And to put it in context for you, I've been CEO of the foundation for 3 years. And in those 3 years, we've travelled to WA for a week, we've travelled to Brisbane for a week, and then here in Alice early this week, and then Darwin for 3 days as well. And the idea is that being a national funder, I think it's a great idea for the whole team just to literally go out and meet the communities and the people who we can potentially work with and support. So it's wonderful to be here. To my right is Alberto Falan. Alberto is Senior Program Manager at the Potter Foundation, responsible for community wellbeing, health and disability and medical research. To Alberto's right is Louise Arkles, and Louise is the Program Manager responsible for environment conservation and the arts, and the Ian Potter Cultural Trust as well. And then Squirrel Main is to Louise's right, and Squirrel is our Research and Evaluation Manager. Nicole Bortone is the Program Manager responsible for science and education. Nicole is unable to be with us here today, and so sitting to Squirrel's right is Lauren Monaghan, and Lauren is a Program Officer who is taking the session on science today and assists Nicole in the science area. So that's the team. They've all waved to you. The idea of this session really is for Q&A. We did a webinar last year in Brisbane. We all had a thought that that webinar is still relevant. So hopefully you've watched the webinar. It gives you some background on the foundation. And we'd like to spend the next 25 minutes really answering your questions. Some housekeeping before I do. First off, I would like to acknowledge the Larrakia people, the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we are meeting today. And I would like to pay my respects to the elders past and present, and also to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present here today. Okay. The Ian Potter Foundation is a foundation with a corpus of about $700 million. We also run the George Alexander Foundation with a corpus of about $40 million. We try and distribute funds as effectively as we can. The two key words that I tend to focus on are strategic and impactful. And we're looking to ensure that our money leverages fantastic opportunities to support the areas that are of interest to us as a foundation. Without any further ado, I'm just going to open the floor up to Q&A. We do have people on a webinar as well, so they might be asking questions. If anyone is on the webinar and can hear this, if you'd like to send some questions through to Mairead, who is our moderator, please feel free to do that. And if we have silence in the room, I'll throw to Mairead for a Dorothy Dixer from the floor. So I'm happy to open it up if there are any questions at all.
My name is Karen Burke de Silva. I'm at Flinders University in South Australia. My question is, if you have a project that sort of falls between two different categories, is there a way to sort of figure out what might be the best program area for that particular project?
I'm going to throw to Alberto to answer that. My first advice to any prospective applicant is don't try and squeeze into our areas. Your project needs to stand on its own 2 feet. And so we have a project that can fit in one or the other. The best thing to do is have a conversation with the program manager. And so that's where I'll throw to Alberto and get his thoughts.
Each of the program areas has guidelines and priorities. They are set by the board, and those change from time to time based on review of the program areas, which we do regularly with the help of Squirrel. So there will be sort of priorities that we look at in each of the program areas. But the main thing is that actually we really strongly encourage people to give us a call and discuss the project with us. And often those projects you might think they fit in one area, but for us, they fit in another one. It's not a matter of us telling you where and why you should be doing your project, but it's for us just to fit it in a way that it's functional and operational for the foundations, because we have subcommittee in each of the areas that discuss prior to board the single application. So we have to fit it in our model, but that doesn't mean that it's not the way that you see it. So it's just a matter of calling us and discuss it. It might fit, it might not fit, but we'll certainly, if it's of interest, we'll fit it somewhere, regardless of the nature of it.
Hi, I'm William Crawford, Chair of the Environment Defenders Office. This question's a bit of a philosophical one for philanthropics. How do you grapple with a world where government sometimes is shrinking its services through cutbacks? I'm thinking of EDO, and is it the role of philanthropics to be filling the failings of the state in terms of, I mean, this is a particular niche area, but also thinking about justice reinvestment, which, you know, typically, you know, may have been the role of the state a long time ago, and you know, is it the role of philanthropics to be involved in things that potentially the government should do, and how does the foundation deal with that?
So my predecessor from about 3 CEOs ago, a lady by the name of Pat Fieldman, who I think was the executive officer at the foundation. She was actually Serene's personal assistant before the foundation was established, and was her attitude was we should never let the government off the hook. So the view of our governors and of the board would be, no, we should not be replacing government, but, you know, should we try and re-leverage government back into areas by highlighting those areas as important areas that are worthy of investment by government? I think the answer is yes, but it would only be if we are leveraging their funding back into those areas. And so, you know, every philanthropic is different. My attitude as still a relatively new CEO is that I want to ensure that you, as a prospective grantee and government as well, and anyone with interest in what we're doing, understands those areas that are of interest to us, and understands that what we're looking to do is to leverage our funding to the greatest extent possible to engage as many players to address that particular issue. That'd be my response to that philanthropic question. Oh, sorry, that philosophical question. Anyone else? No?
Totally agree. I think that's exactly right. And many, many foundations work in that same way, that they're really conscious not to step in and play that role of replacing government funding, exactly for that reason, that it lets government off the hook.
Thanks for the question.
Although we also play in the space that it's, you know, left behind sometimes, and I'm thinking about justice reinvestment, or thinking about the space we work in, which is pathways out of the justice system in systems that governments, you know, failed essentially in the past. And we play a role to catalyze organizations around it, and we work in the space to make sort of really fun projects that really provide evidence for a better investment of government funding. So we kickstart, or we see the project that might be obviously be taken up by government, and there's multiple examples we'll give you later on. So we do see our role in the sort of you know, spark of you know, better investment as we see it.
Thanks. Any questions from you, Mairead?
I have got a question. I've got a question from Dr. John Ng from St. Vincent Centre for Applied Medical Research. He wants to ask a question: what are the top 3 reasons a medical infrastructure grant is rejected or unsupported or falls under the non-competitive category?
Okay, that's a great question for Alberto.
In the medical research space, we really found a niche quite some time ago, and this is provision of equipment or setup for labs, because we recognize that not many fund in that space, and it's increasingly difficult to get capital grants from NHMRC and the likes. We look at the collaborations and really usage of the equipment that we provide funding. So there's multiple users. We look at that very highly. We look at the way that this new equipment is going to help you to go to the next step. So if it complements the work you're doing, but also will allow you to achieve more, we look at that. So if the equipment doesn't do it, we probably wouldn't support it. We look at usage, whether or not there's a system for booking and usage across the various themes of the research organization or across organizations. So we look at the sort of impact that the single machine might help and value for money for every grant that we give. But having said that, it's extremely competitive, as you all would know. So, the fact of not receiving a grant does not mean at all that the project wasn't good or it wasn't, well thought through. It's just a matter of what the priorities have been recognized for that particular board meeting within the areas and also with the competing priorities of the other areas that we fund. So not receiving a grant doesn't mean your project is not good. It's just, others were prioritized.
I think just to put that in context, we have a board meeting next week and medical research is being considered. I think there are 13 applications, Alberto, have gone to board seeking $1.7 million. And of the 13, we started with how many through the EOI process?
We started with medical research as a straight application, not an EOI form, but we started with about 35 and there's a short list of about 15, 16. And probably will make about 10 grants. So that's sort of a third in that area, but in other areas from EOI process to full grant, it's about 10% success rate. Having said that, from full application, which is a step after the EOI, to grant, there's usually a 50% success rate, 40 to 50%. So we like to screen and assess EOIs. So you don't waste time writing a full application, 15 pages, because it's you that work in the field that we most value. And we also don't assess applications that don't fit guidelines. So from full application to grants, about 40 to 50% success rate.
Any other questions in the room? Yes.
What are your priorities at the moment?
So the question was, what are our priorities at the moment? We fund in 7 major program areas. So those 7 are health and disability, and health is public health policy initiatives. Disability is disability employment, fairly focused. Medical research, as Alberto said, which is equipment purchase specifically. Environment and conservation, where Louise is the program manager. Community wellbeing, where we have sort of 3 different areas we focus on in community wellbeing. Science, the arts, education. I think I've covered them all. They're the 7 areas. But we've been relatively consistently focused in those areas for the last 5-6 years. What we have done though in the last 3 to 4 years is really to narrow the focus of our funding guidelines in those areas. And we have another question. Do we or not? No. I've answered the question. Great. Cool. Thank you.
We will go through the priorities in the breakout session, specific priorities of each of the areas. So stick around for that.
We have a question over here, Sabadra. Oh, I'll go for it. Head's fine.
Sorry. I just was wondering about your conference grants and travel grants. Where do they fit in?
They are currently being reviewed by the board. So I'm sending you a very strong signal that they may not fit going forward. And there'll be a very good reason for that, which will be announced should the board approve what is going to board. Another question.
So Will Crawford again, just hogging the microphone. Just a question, do you occasionally have issues where organisations may not have either complete capacity and you matchmake and suggest partnerships so that a consortium can do a better job for a larger scale project that needs more capacity, or do other matchmaking where there's good ideas?
Louise, do you want to have a crack at answering that initially?
Sure, yeah, we really do value it when applicants come to us with partnerships in place and where they're highly collaborative. There might be occasions where we do suggest that there are connections to be made and we introduce people to each other. Generally, we like to see that organisations have already thought about this and and have approached the right people. And quite often those organisations that haven't been collaborative and that really haven't talked about engaging with others beyond the walls of their own organisation are not prioritised, not as competitive. But yes, we do sometimes take that extra step to put people in touch with each other.
And we also do work to assist either grantees or prospective grantees seek other forms of funding as well. So that I see that as a big part of my role in that as CEO of the Potter Foundation, I can open doors and at least make introductions for organisations. So where we think that makes sense to do that, we do that also. Up the back there.
We fit in a bit of an odd area.
Sorry, what name and where you're from? I apologise.
Marianne St Clair from the Northern Institute. We work in collaboration with a number of organisations, including Aboriginal remote communities and health centres, NBN, Broadband for the Bush, and others, yep. Telstra. So we work in telehealth, and we're developing technological solutions for delivering better health services in remote areas.
Right.
And we fall, because it's health informatics, it's not really health, it's not really pure medical research. There's a lot of collaboration going on. So I'm struggled a bit where we might fit in your programs, because we don't really, and the trouble is getting funding. We've struggled to get funding. Yeah. For example, for one community, there's a young deaf boy there, 19 years old, never had any support, very, very remote. The NDIS will fund training for him through the Deaf and Blind Kids Association or something like that, but they won't fund the NBN or video conferencing right. aspects. Yep. So we've been trying to get money for that kid for 2 years.
Yep. Alberto?
Yeah, look, on the specific programs, we need to have a closer look to it before we can sort of elaborate on it. But generally speaking, that sort of programs will fund under health and disability area funding, the health side of it, where we fund public health initiatives to deliver better health services. In fact, it would be quite a good fit on paper. Give you an example. We funded Hello Sunday Morning. I don't know if you know it, but it's essentially a digital platform that helps people to readjust their relationship with alcohol through coaching, online coaching, and they have about 25,000 users through an app. So we funded the development of the app and the build up for this next system. So you go on the app and there's a coach, like a trained coach is 8 hours a day. You can chat with the coach, you can talk with the coach. So that's clearly, telehealth or public health initiative through the medium of new technology, which is not new anymore, but of course it's technologies we use every day, every minute of the day. So it's certainly a potential fit with our health area funding.
The issue I would highlight for your specific example is ensuring that if you're approaching someone like the Potter Foundation and having conversations, we're looking at as broad applicability of the program as possible. So as opposed to a narrow focus on a particular individual, you're looking at the potential benefit to a large number of people in remote and rural Australia. And the focus on that area is a focus for us. If you don't mind, I'll come back to you. I'll let the lady behind you ask, and I'll come back to you for a follow-up question. Thanks. Yes.
Hello, I'm Kamal from Real Research Institute for the Environment and Livelihoods at Charles Darwin University. And I work cross-disciplinary, like ecology and economics. So our team works a lot with remote communities, creating opportunities on land through fire management. So you may have heard about carbon economy, which is worth about $40 million up in the north. Yes. And that directly impacts on community well-being, individual as well as community well-being. So again, just following up the previous question, because I sit in the same kind of area and get confused, where you can apply for funding in this kind of stream where you got health benefits, direct health benefits for people working on country, and the economic benefits, and there are ecological benefits. How that will be covered under your foundation?
I'd like to throw to Louise, who's the program manager responsible for environment conservation.
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. And we do see that kind of overlap, particularly in the impact of programs, quite a lot in the environment space. And I think that the kind of discussion or project that you mentioned would come under environment and conservation and fit quite comfortably there. We also do have a stream that we don't publicise as much called major grants, and at the moment we are looking. I am looking at some grants with looking at Indigenous space, but particularly environment conservation programs with Indigenous remote communities, and we look very holistically there. We're looking at possibly supporting some work that's ostensibly for the environment. So it's about people being on country, looking after country, but we understand and appreciate and take into account that there's whole of community impacts on health, wellbeing, education, but the actual work that might be funded that we could pay for people to perform would be environmental work. So there are times in which we can be quite holistic in our view, but in terms of the program areas that you can apply for, that one sounds like it would actually fit quite well under environment conservation.
So environment conservation is about large-scale land management, large-scale water management, and also biodiversity loss. So, and then we completely recognise the ongoing additional community benefits, and particularly for remote Australians, the capacity for that to facilitate community-wide self-sustaining income stream and the benefits that flows from that, we understand and we consider a lot.
Sorry, if I can add to that, we understand, we acknowledge that you can't pigeonhole programs, especially when it comes to remote Australia or Indigenous Australia, for instance, and we're very willing to engage with that. Louise was up in West Arnhem Land 2 weeks ago. Craig, myself and Lauren were in a remote community in, not the remote, 50 k's north of Alice Springs on Tuesday. Housing Wadeye yesterday. So we go out and talk to people and are guided by them and very open to conversation. So you might think it's across areas, and probably is, but we'll find them a place in the foundation granting stream. It's just a matter of starting conversations, which they can be 6 to 12 months before a grant opportunity comes up. But it's all the conversation, the learning from each other that we really want to pursue.
And I've got one more question from just Nissa Badr there, but I should make the point that the CEO and with my team, we are a genuine administrative team, so we do not have a vote at board. So we present to board, and it's a very specific governance responsibility the board has to approve the grants. So some of these grants, we've got to make sure that we sell them and present them as effectively as we can to board to ensure the board understands all the relevant issues as well. Sorry, thanks, Sabadra.
I guess the other areas that we're trying to get funding for are for the remote cattle producers and fishers. So we have the remotest cattle station in Australia really keen to be involved in telehealth trials, but we can't get any funding to actually, we got bits and pieces that we're using to develop the systems, but we're having trouble getting funding to develop that infrastructure that we can roll out to remote Indigenous communities and cattle stations and fishing boats, etc.
My first query would be, which is the organisation that has the appropriate DGR status to be funded through? So that's my question for that sort of project. And the second is, you've then just got to read the guidelines, and as Alberto said before, give them a call and try and work out where it might fit. That one off the top of my head is going to be much harder for someone like the Potter Foundation for it to fit, is my sense. Sorry, another question.
Hi, Elisa Duff, Garmalung Festival, Darwin Entertainment Centre. So you mentioned there were 7 project streams or 7 different funding streams. Within the arts category, is there a designated minimum amount of funding that you have available, as opposed to, say, the money gets taken up in infrastructure or in medical research, and then the arts is sort of left behind at the end and you've got $10,000 left over?
Definitely not.
So
no,
yeah, before Louise jumps in there, we're probably one of the largest private funders of the arts in the country. So I do have responsibility for the percentage allocation across the program areas, and I undertake that work in conjunction with the chairman, and these guys are given a budget. The arts is absolutely critical to that, so no, it's not. It's front of mind. Lady Potter is the only life governor on the board, and Lady Potter is the chair of the arts committee, so it gives you a sense as to the gravitas within the foundation that arts has. And so, no, it's a major program area. The arts, including Cultural Trust, receives about 17% of the funding allocation, which is slightly more than 1/7. So again, to give you that sense. And then Louise can talk you through our focus in the arts funding.
Sure, and can go into more detail when we have the breakouts later.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Leave it at that. Leave it at the arts
But
section.
we'll have opportunities just when we're all arts people in the room to talk through in more detail.
What most excites me about our arts funding is the current funding guidelines. If you have a look at those on the website, it's all about capacity building for arts organisations. To answer your question directly, the minimum grant size is $100,000, but the average duration of grants now is approaching 3 years. So therefore, small organisations that can benefit from $30,000 to $35,000 a year are absolutely in that sweet spot. For organisations to be ready to accept that sort of money, you've actually got to be a well-developed organisation that can clearly articulate a strategy and how that funding might benefit you. Sorry, you have a follow-up question?
That's fantastic because that hits everything that we actually are.
Great. Yeah, so you can chat to Louise about that later. Thanks. Any questions online, Mairead?
It's all quiet.
Great. Any questions in the room? So I'm just, sorry. We might just wait for the microphone. Thank you. And if you can just tell us your name and where you're from.
Guy Alain from Munupi Art in the Tiwi Island. I'm the art center manager there. I just wonder about the art. Do you do also project funding? And would you support also international projects?
We do support project funding. We support both capacity building as well as project funding for different organisations. However, as with many philanthropic organisations, foundations in Australia, we are limited to the public benefit of our grants being kept within Australia. So we're not legally able to fund overseas. Overseas collaborations. If overseas artists are coming into Australia and are part of a project, that may be eligible. However, we do not support performances or exhibitions or festivals. So we don't support things that are of their time, short-term, place-based. We have a very different approach that's more strategic around growing arts organisations and the strength of the sector. So we're probably not likely to prioritise funds to bring overseas artists in for a performance. However, if they happen to be part of a professional development or leadership role, then that might fit. Yeah.
Okay, it is 10 o'clock and I'm told I've got to keep fairly strictly to time. Is there one more question in the room? And if not, I'll take one last question. Thank you. Go for it. Loud voice, go for it.
So I'm just wondering what the Appetites Foundation is to fund new ways of tackling issues. So if there's a major issue that gets tackled or dealt with in a particular way, and there's a new sort of innovative way or an element that hasn't been considered.
Yep.
Where there may not be necessarily a lot of data and research being collected. It's more anecdotal and that sort of information to support the fact that there's a need in that space.
So the question is, if I can paraphrase, to what extent does the foundation have appetite for innovation, and possibly not even strong evidence-based innovation? Probably less. I would suggest being innovative and supporting innovation is a core tenet of the foundation. So the short answer is we absolutely support innovation. Whether we would support innovation that did not have a strong evidence base, I would query. It would actually depend on the person or the organisation. I can think of one example that we funded recently, an organisation called Covenants, which is run by a guy called Julian Elliott, which is developing a very innovative technology-based platform to improve the translation of medical research into practical benefits for patients. And that is something that came to us through the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation. It is unproven, it is innovative in the space, and it was funded. And the reason why it was funded is because Julian Elliott is regarded as one of Australia's leading scientists. And the governors knew of him and were prepared to back him. So it's very much something that we do and are comfortable doing from time to time. I'm going to close this Q&A session off there.